So scales are, of course, very, very important, but you need to decide like what are you practicing scales for? Like what is the purpose of the scales? A lot of times I will see kids who switch to me and they'll come in and they'll say, "Oh, my teacher did lots of scales." And I'm like, "Okay, like show me or what did you do?" And they pretty much just sort of run through some scales kind of quickly. And I'm like, "Okay, what are you doing?" And they're like, "Scales." And I'm like, but you have to like a point for the scale. Even more important than just intonation. Scales are about many other things. I'll give you a couple of my like secret scale practice ways. These are not mine. These are from a lot of them are from Galamian, but so you can do the normal way, da 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 da, da that everyone does in 1, 2, 4,
Yeah.
and going up. But when you're doing those, instead of falling into a boredom coma, you can think of things like, what is my bow doing? Where am I in the bow? Is it being perfectly divided? How does my bow arm feel? And you can think about sound, so you can think about like, am I going fast? How do my fingers feel? And then you can think about sound. So those are two things in that scale. And that when we do that kind of bowings, I actually don't feel like we're really listening well enough. So for intonation, I actually break the scale into 3 octaves and do the first octave as second octave and third octave is out separately. And then do the first octave very slowly with just pitches and listening to the half steps. And you'd be really, really surprised at how out of tune everyone is. So if you take the time to listen to yourself just play 1 octave of a scale, you're like, oh, and then it sort of like turns your brain on. But you're not going to get that if you're just playing like 3 octave scales, just like really fast. Instead, just play a 1 octave scale really slowly and then do the middle octave and then do the higher octave. So that's scales for intonation. Another way that I love to assign scales is to make up a fun bowing pattern, like 3, 6, 2, where you have to go do, re, mi, and then you've got six. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 1, 2,
Yeah.
3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And what's cool about that is we're learning more about bow pattern, bow distribution. We're having to plan and focus because our brain can't wander away because we're focusing on that. So that also gets your bow into it and sort of serves as like a good warm up. So a lot of my students will do all of those. Probably half my students do all of those kind of scales a day,
Mhm.
but the other half don't for various reasons. From not being quite ready to not being able to have quite enough time, to me thinking that something else might be a little bit more important for him or her at that time.
Okay.
Also, I feel like a lot of teachers give too many scales too early. And what happens is if a scale is just sort of played very fast and very out of tune, then there's really no purpose to that scale, actually. So it's just like playing a passage in Mendelssohn and being really fast and kind of out of tune. There's no like scales don't hold any magical powers if they are played like badly. And so I see a lot, especially on Instagram or other platforms, where teachers are like talking about scales, 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 scales. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm listening, and those are some very out of tune scales, or that scale is literally too hard for that child. Like scales on the violin and piano were so different. On the piano, it's a part of their like initial pedagogy. For us, a D major scale requires us to go really high. So that's involving shifts, that's involving like how does our arm come around? How does our finger move up that high? What does our thumb do? Blah, blah, blah. So I would actually rather wait and do others like G major for longer or A major for longer, and then get to those when the time is right and when it's going to be nice and in tune. So I think that is something that's really important, is that right, there's sort of this notion that, oh, I played every scale every day. Well, you know what? If it's fast and sloppy, that doesn't mean anything. You've actually hurt yourself.
Yeah.
So I kind of feel very passionately about this. It's actually like when people talk about scales or technique, I'm like, it has to be done right at the right level, you have to be listening in the right way, or it's simply just literally like playing Zigon, the opening on the D string and out of tune.